Dear people watching and listening, Assalamu alaikum. Kindly like and share this video and subscribe to my YouTube channel. Kindly support my channel by contributing to my Patreon account so that I can continue making such audiobooks for you. The Muslim Conquest of Persia by Lieutenant General A.I. Akram. This book tells in detail about the Arab conquest of Persia, also known as the Arab conquest of Iran, during the Rashidun Caliphate from 633 to 654 AD. This conquest brought the fall of the Sassanid Empire, which was in power for over 4 centuries, while rivaling its neighbor, the Eastern Roman Empire of Byzantine. Start of Chapter 3. The Victories and Defeat of Abu Ubaid. Muthanna arrived at Medina to find the Caliph dying. He entered Abu Bakr's chamber and approached his deathbed. The Caliph was alive enough and clear-headed enough to listen, judge, and decide. Muthanna explained briefly the situation on the Iraq front, the adverse ratio of opposing strengths, the likelihood of a powerful offensive by the Persians, and the difficulty of holding Iraq with his small army. He asked for reinforcements and urged the Caliph to allow the apostates to join his campaign. Abu Bakr held strong views about the apostates, who had nearly wrecked the ship of Islam after the death of the Holy Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. Abu Bakr's greatest achievement had been his war against the apostates, and he was one of the very few men who could have carried the staggering burden which the apostasy had thrown on the Muslim state. After the destruction of the apostasy, Abu Bakr had ordered that no apostate would be allowed to take part in the holy war. The apostates had returned to the fold of Islam, of course, and the situation of the holy war had altered somewhat, but knowing that he was dying, Abu Bakr decided not to give any order on this point, which his successor might not wish to implement. He sent for Umar, the Caliph designate, and a few minutes later Umar stood beside the departing Caliph. "Listen, O Umar, to what I say to you," said the Caliph, "and act upon my words. I hope to die this very day, and when I am dead, let not the evening come upon you before you have exhorted the people to go with Muthanna. And if I survive till nightfall, let not the morning come before you have exhorted the people to go with Muthanna." Abu Bakr died early that night in 634 Hijri, the same night he was buried, and the same night, after funeral prayer and before the prayer of the dawn, the new Caliph assembled the Muslims in the mosque and urged them to join Muthanna in the campaign in Iraq. There was no response. The following morning the Muslims of Medina assembled again, this time to take the oath of allegiance to Caliph Umar, and again Umar spoke about Iraq and Muthanna. Again there were no volunteers. The Arab feared the Persian, feared him with a deep, unreasoning fear which ran in the racial subconscious, and was the result of centuries of Persian power and glory, during which the Persian had ruled other peoples with a heavy hand and treated the Arab of the desert with unconcealed contempt. The Arab was willing enough to go to Syria to fight the Romans, but the Persians were another matter. Umar was conscious of this. He also realized the vital importance of waging a successful war in Iraq, for no new caliph could afford to surrender immediately on taking the reins of power in his hands. a rich dominion which his predecessor had conquered. Moreover, the torch of holy war had to be kept alive. The following day, Umar again assembled the Muslims, and this time it was Muthanna who started the proceedings. In a brief address, he spoke of the victories gained by the Muslims in Iraq, and of the wealth which Iraq offered to those who had the courage to fight for it and hold it in their power. Then Umar spoke and made a stirring appeal, in which he reminded the faithful of Allah's help to his servants and the promise of Allah that they would inherit the earth. This time the response was better. The first man to stand and offer his services was one named Abu Ubaid bin Mas'ud of the tribe of Saqif. "Labbaik," said the man. He was followed by others, and after a little while, a few hundred had come forward and volunteered to fight in Iraq, including many immigrants and Ansars, the senior-most of the companions of the Holy Prophet, sallallahu alaihi wasallam. Upon seeing the reluctance of the people to go and fight the Persians, Umar had made up his mind to reward the courage and keenness of the first volunteer by appointing him commander-in-chief in Iraq. He had hoped that one of the more senior and battle-tried members of the congregation would be the first, and although the first man to volunteer was a relatively younger man, who was also not from among the early companions, he determined to stick to his resolution. He announced that Abu Ubaid would command the army in Iraq, and all others would serve under him, including Muthanna. A little later, some of the older Muslims approached Umar and asked him to appoint one of the early companions of the Prophet, sallallahu alaihi wasallam, as commander, since they had a higher standing in Islam. "Are you placing a man from the Saqif in command over the immigrants and Ansars?" they asked. Umar replied that the immigrants and Ansars held a high position only because they were the first to go forth to do battle with the infidel. This time they had shown no great keenness in answering his call to arms, and so the first volunteer, even if he was not from among them, would be the commander. Muthanna left at once for Iraq to take up his station against the Persians, while awaiting the arrival of reinforcements. Meanwhile, a small force of 1,000 volunteers was gathered in Medina and placed under Abu Ubaid. Abu Ubaid was an inexperienced soldier who, if left to his own devices, could lead the Muslims into serious trouble. He was a fearless and noble Muslim, but the conduct of war called for qualities of leadership which were not provided by just will and courage. Umar knew this and appointed two older Muslims as Abu Ubaid's advisors, viz. Sa'd bin Ubaid and Salid bin Qais, both veterans of Badr, the first battle of Islam. "Pay heed to the companions of the Prophet, sallallahu alaihi wasallam, on whom be the blessings of Allah and peace," said Umar to Abu Ubaid. "Let them join you in matters of command. Do not act fast until the situation is clear, for war is war and goes best with a man of patience, who knows when to seize an opportunity and when to wait. Haste in war leads to failure." In the meantime, Rustam had laid his plans and launched his first move. His intention was to eject the Muslims from the Suwad, which was the name by which the most fruitful and populous part of Iraq was known. The Suwad was the land between the Euphrates and the Tigris from Basra to Ctesiphon, and stretched further northwards to Mosul and Hulwan. It also included a wide strip of fertile land along the left bank of the lower Tigris, which bulged in its southern part towards Ahwaz. Rustam determined to use direct military force as well as insurrectional methods against the Muslims. He wrote to the mayor of all the towns, urging them to fight in the cause of the Persian Empire, and also sent agents provocateurs to incite the people to rise against the invaders. As for direct military measures, Rustam formed three small armies, two of which were placed under Narsa and Jaban. Narsa was sent to Kaskar to re-establish Persian government in the eastern part of the Suwad and to act as a bait to draw the Muslims thither. Jaban was sent to the Euphrates to cross the river in the region of Hira and maneuver directly against the Muslim base. These two forces, operating in separate areas, would either force the Muslims out of Iraq or cause dispersion in the Muslim army. They would engage in battle and weaken the Muslims, whereas Rustam would send another force to further exhaust and bleed the Muslim army. Then finally, Rustam would launch the Fourth Army, his big punch, under the formidable general Bahman, to deliver the coup de grace. It was a finely timed and well thought out plan, and the Muslims, thanks to the inexperience of Abu Ubaid, reacted exactly as Rustam hoped, though with much more vigor and dash than Rustam wished. Muthanna returned to Hira to find the Persian moves underway and realized that a major offensive was in the offing. Having spent years as a raider, and having closely watched Khalid's strategy of fighting his battles close to the desert, he had no intention of getting involved in set-piece battles deep in Iraq against numerically superior forces. Some of the Muslim outposts had already pulled back from the Suwad, and now Muthanna withdrew the remainder of his garrisons behind the Euphrates. In his next move, as Jaban approached the Euphrates, Muthanna evacuated Hira and moved down to Khafan in order to tempt Jaban to cross the Euphrates and draw him close to the desert. The elephant seemed well again, and the leopard moved out of his path. Abu Ubaid set off from Medina, and on his way to Iraq called upon all the Muslim tribes through whose areas he marched to furnish warriors for his army. The tribes responded fairly well, and Abu Ubaid was able to recruit another 4,000 fighting men before he joined Muthanna at Ghafan in early October of 634, early Shaban, 13 Hijri. Meanwhile, Jaban had crossed the Euphrates and advanced towards the Muslims. He got to Namarik, near the site of Kufa, and stopped. Jaban had fought Khalid in the Battle of Ulais, in which most of his army of Persians and Christian Arabs had been annihilated in the River of Blood. Jaban himself had only just managed to escape, and knew full well that to lose a battle to the Muslims meant virtual destruction of the army, unless he kept his escape routes open. He consequently decided not to move beyond Namarik, and here awaited the Muslims. He was a brave and skillful general who had earned for his troops a rare tribute from the great Khalid himself. After a week in Khafan, Abu Ubaid moved forward with an army of 12,000 warriors, a good part of which was cavalry. He appointed Muthanna as commander of the cavalry, and on arrival at Namarik, both armies deployed and engaged in battle, of which no details are available. The Persians were defeated and retreated in disorder from the battlefield, while Jaban was captured by a Muslim soldier. The soldier did not know the identity of his distinguished prisoner, who talked him into releasing him on payment of ransom. Later, however, the Muslim discovered that his prisoner was none other than the Persian army commander, who wished to kill him, but Abu Ubaid, a fine true Muslim, ordered the band freed for the reason that once a Muslim had given a promise of life and freedom to his prisoner, the prisoner could not be harmed. This battle was fought in the second week of October, 634. It was hardly over when Abu Ubaid decided to advance to Kaskar, 150 miles away, to fight the second Persian army which by its very presence in that region was disputing the Muslim hold over the Suwad. Musanna, as commander of the Muslim cavalry, was sent off at a fast pace, while the rest of the army crossed the Euphrates and followed on camels. A fortnight later, the Muslims fought and defeated Narsa in battle at a place named Sakatia, near Kaskar, and again the Persians retreated before the assault of the Muslims. Sakatia was sacked by the victors, and a great deal of booty fell into their hands. Abu Ubaid now ordered the return march. He was driving his men very hard, but the example of their tireless commander was enough to silence all complaints, and the booty gained in battle made the sweat and blood worthwhile in the eyes of the men. 2 weeks later, as the Muslims approached the Euphrates on their way to Hira, they found another Persian army awaiting them under a general named Jalinus, the third army sent by Rustam against the Muslims. Abu Ubaid took no time to array his army for battle, and at Baksiyasa, in the district of Barusma, the Muslims fought and defeated this third Persian army. Jalinus fled from the battlefield with rather more haste than was decent, but was able to extricate most of his troops. The day after this battle was fought, some local civil officials came to the Muslims and assured them of their loyalty, but this was received by the Muslims with less than total faith. One mayor brought some fine dishes of food to Abu Ubaid as a mark of respect to the Muslim commander and his officers. On being asked by Abu Ubaid if similar food would be given to all the soldiers, the mayor explained that it was just not possible to provide such a meal to everybody. Thereupon Abu Ubaid returned the fine fare with the remarks, "If the army cannot have such food, we have no need for it. We shall only eat what all eat." Abu Ubaid crossed the Euphrates and reoccupied Hira. He felt satisfied with the situation, not knowing that Rustam too felt satisfied. By now even Umar was getting a bit alarmed at Abu Ubaid's wild marches across Iraq in search of glory and paradise. Thus, soon after his return to Hira, Abu Ubaid received a letter from the Caliph which read, "You have entered the land of trickery and guile and dishonesty and oppression. You have marched against a people who love evil and know it well, and abjure goodness, of which they are ignorant. So be on your guard, and watch your tongue. Reveal not your secrets, for those who guard their secrets are secure against unpleasantness and loss." Persia was a vast empire. Geographically, it consisted of two great plains separated from one another by mountains. The western part of the empire comprised the plain of Iraq, which includes the valleys of the Euphrates and the Tigris, and runs into the Syrian desert in the west and the Arabian desert in the south. As an eastern extension of this plain lies the fertile land of Khuzestan, watered by the river Karun, which the Arabs knew as Tujail. East of this plain stand the Zagros Mountains, rising near the Persian Gulf and running in a northwesterly direction to Azerbaijan, where they are joined by the Elburz Range in a high tangled mass, and stretch further northwards to connect with the Caucasus Mountains. From Azerbaijan, the Elburz Mountains run eastwards, skirting the southern shore of the Caspian Sea to a little beyond Gorgan. The second of the Great Plains was the arid Iranian Plateau, bounded in the west and north by the Zagros and Elburz mountains, and stretching eastwards to embrace Afghanistan and Balochistan. North and northeast of the eastern end of the Elburz range lay the steppes of Central Asia. The region with which we are most immediately concerned, however, is the Western Plain, which meant mainly Iraq. Islam and Persia were now fighting for Iraq, specifically for the Suwad, the most productive part of Iraq over much of which Khalid had established Muslim rule. Iraq was one of the many lands which formed part of the Persian Empire, and it was undoubtedly the most prized possession of the Persians. It was a green jewel on the rich soil of which many great nations and dynasties had risen, fought and perished since the time of the ancient Sumerians. To the Arabs of the barren wastes of Arabia, it was a land of milk and honey. Its two mighty rivers, the Euphrates and the Tigris, were the greatest known rivers of the time west of the Indus and north of the Nile. But these rivers did not then flow as they flow now, nor were the cities of Iraq as the cities of today. Kufa and Basra did not exist. They were founded in 17 Hijri. Baghdad was a small though much frequented market town on the west bank of the Tigris. The then glorious cities of Ctesiphon and Hira are now turned to dust. Ctesiphon was a mighty metropolis and the capital and seat of glory of the Persian Empire. It sprawled on both sides of the Tigris and was known to the Muslims as Madain, literally the cities, for it consisted of several cities in one, of which more will be said in later chapter. Hira was the capital of the Arab Lakhmid dynasty, situated on the west bank of the Euphrates. It was a glittering, throbbing city with many citadels. And there was Uballa, the main port of the Persian Empire, which was visited by ships from India and China and other maritime countries of the East. The Euphrates and the Tigris have been known to change their course more than once since the time of Babylon. The maps in this book show the course which these rivers flowed in the early days of Islam. The main change from today is in the course of the Tigris. In pre-Islamic times it had flowed in what is its present channel and is known as the Jalatul Ora, which means the one-eyed Tigris. But then it had abandoned this channel and adopted a new course from Kut downwards along the Dujayla, the Little Tigris, and the Akhzar to enter a region of lakes and marshes comprising an area about 100 miles square, just northwest of Uballa. The old bed of the river had then become a dry, sandy bed. The marshes extended much farther north than they do today, and the Tigris picked its way through these marshes to rejoin the bed of the one-eyed Tigris in the region of Mazar, the present Azir, whence it flowed south and southeast into the Persian Gulf. But the Tigris changed its course again in the 16th century and returned to its old bed, the one marked on maps now as the Tigris. This is not, however, the largest branch of the Tigris, for the Gharraf taking off from Kut and joining the Euphrates at Nasiriyah is larger. The Dujayla, which in the early days of Islam was the main channel, is now a modest river, the third largest branch of the Tigris, after the Gharraf and the one-eyed Tigris. The Euphrates followed a clear course down to the present India, whence it split into two main channels as it does today, both sizable rivers, the Hila branch and the main Euphrates. The main branch, the western one, again split up, flowing generally in one large and several subsidiary channels, which over the centuries have changed course several times, though not as drastically as the Tigris. The two main branches reunited at Samawa, whence the Euphrates flowed towards the region of lakes and marshes already mentioned. While some of the water of the river lost itself in the marshes, one clear channel marked on today's maps as the Euphrates retained its distinct identity as it flowed eastward to join the Tigris at Kurna. The marshes were drained by a large river which emptied into the Tigris a few miles above Basra, and from this junction all these waters flowed into the Persian Gulf as one mighty river, known today as Shatul Arab. This then was the state of Iraq geographically in the 7th century. It was inhabited by Persians and Arabs and was the part of Persia nearest to the home of Islam. The operations of the last few weeks had gone as Rustam had planned. The Muslims had reacted to his moves as Rustam had hoped, and a certain amount of wearing down had been effected in the Muslim army. But Rustam had not expected that his three smaller armies would be beaten as badly as they were, and was particularly angry with Jalinus, considering that he had fought the Muslims soon after they had been engaged by Jaban and Nursa, should have done better than he did. "Send him ahead," Rustam ordered Bahman, the commander of the main Persian army. "If he retreats again, cut off his head." Bahman was charged with the mission of advancing towards Hira, bringing the Muslims to battle, destroying them in battle, and driving the remnants out of Iraq. The strength of his army is not recorded, but it included a group of war elephants. And to leave no doubt in the general's mind about the importance of his task, the emperor gave him to carry in battle the great standard of Persia, known as the Rafsh-e-Khayyan, the most glorious and most venerated symbol of the empire. The Persian society of the time was an imperial and aristocratic one, and as is inevitable in such societies, it had an elaborate system of ranks to indicate a man's social and official position at the court. The outward symbol of rank was the cap. As a man rose in rank, his cap became more costly. The highest rank below the emperor carried a cap worth 100,000 dirhams, which was studded with diamonds and pearls and other precious stones. Of the Persian generals who had fought Khalid in the preceding year, Hormuz and Karin wore 100,000 dirham caps, and Andar Zaghr and Azaz Bey were one rank lower, 50,000 dirhams. Of these only the last named had escaped alive from the clutches of Khalid. Bahman was 100,000 dirham man. Bahman was also the top soldier of Persia. He was second to Rustam only because Rustam had seized political power and made himself the virtual ruler of the empire. An old veteran, he had fought with distinction under Anushirwan, who had given him the name of Bahman as a title of honor. His actual name was Mardan Shah. He was also known as Zul Hajib, the man with eyebrows, and was so called because he combed his eyebrows upwards. Today we would refer to him light-heartedly as General Eyebrows. Eyebrows marched with his army towards Hira and camped on the east bank of the Euphrates at a place called Kusnatif, some distance north of Hira and of a little below the site of Kufa. From Hira, Abu Ubaid moved up opposite the Persians and camped with 9,000 men on the west bank by a village called Maroha. On the following day, Bahman sent an emissary to the Muslim commander with the message: "Either you cross over to our side, and we shall let you, or we shall cross over to your side, and you must let us." When this message was delivered, the officers standing around Abu Ubaid said, Do not cross, O Abu Ubaid. We forbid you to cross. Tell them to cross. The obvious strategy for the Muslims was to let the Persians cross, so that the great river would act as an obstacle in the way of Persian retreat, while their own line of retreat would remain open in case of a reverse. But Abu Ubaid was no strategist, and he had become overconfident as a result of the clear but insignificant victories which he had won over the past few weeks. There shall be none, Abu Ubaid asserted, more willing to die than us. We shall cross to their side. The officers were horrified at the military blunder which their commander was about to commit. But Abu Ubaid's resolution was strengthened by the knowledge that in this battle he would drink the cup of martyrdom and enter paradise. The night before, his wife had dreamed that a man came down from heaven with a vessel from which first Abu Ubaid drank, then his brother Al-Hakam and his son Jabr, and then a few others from his family. She had described the dream to Abu Ubaid, whereupon he had remarked, "This means martyrdom. For the true believer, this was the ultimate trial and the ultimate triumph." Next, Salid bin Qais, the man appointed by Umar as Abu Ubaid's deputy, said, "Never have the Arabs faced the Persians in battle since the beginning of the race, but the Persians have been vastly superior in strength, and have met us with an abundance of equipment and material such as we never possessed. You are now in a place which gives us room for attack and a way of escape, so that we can withdraw and counterattack." "You are frightened," Abu Ubaid retorted, no longer amenable to reason. Salid was furious. "By Allah," he swore, "I am bolder than you. You have been advised and soon you will know." He said no more after this. Finally, Muthanna made an attempt to deter Abu Ubaid from the rash enterprise. "O commander," he said, "do not cut your means of escape, and do not make yourself and those who are with you a target for the Persians." Muthanna could claim to know more about the Persians than any other Muslim, but he too was silenced by Abu Ubaid, who said, "You too are frightened, O brother of Bakr." The allusion was to Muthanna's tribe. As a result of the last exchange, Abu Ubaid removed Muthanna from the command of the cavalry and appointed in his place his own cousin, Abu Mihjan. Abu Ubaid also announced that in case of his death the command would devolve upon his brother Al-Hakam, in case of his death upon his son Jabr, and named several others who would follow in command. These officers were those who had drunk of the heavenly vessels in the dream of Abu Ubaid's wife. Muthanna was left in command of his own tribal contingent, the Bani Bakr. The decision of Abu Ubaid to cross the river was carried back by Bahman's emissary. The Persian could have hoped for nothing better. He pulled his army back some distance from the river bank and deployed it to await the Muslim crossing when it came. Then a bridge was thrown across the river. It was a port bridge and was constructed by neutral engineers, Christian Arabs working under Ibn Saluba, son of the mayor of Kusnatif, who had submitted to Khalid on the conquest of Hira. When the bridge was complete, the stage was set for the Battle of Kusnatif, also known as the Battle of the Bridge. Early in the morning of November 28, 634, 30th of Ramadan, 13 Hijri, the Muslim army began to cross the river by the boat bridge. The Persians stood back as per agreement and made no move for 2 hours or so while their opponents crossed over to their side, but remained arrayed in battle order in tight formation, in such a manner that no outflanking movement would be possible. The strongest element in the Persian army was the group of elephants, which stood dispersed in the front rank. Each elephant carried a howdah filled with soldiers armed with javelins and bows, and to each howdah the Persians had tied a palm tree in order to increase the illusion of size. In between the elephants, Bahman had deployed his heavy cavalry to form the front rank. The ground which the Persians left for the Muslims to occupy was not very suitable for movement and allowed little room for maneuver. The more experienced Muslims looked with misgiving at the Persian battle formation and the situation of the battlefield. As the crossing progressed, Abu Ubaid, who was among the first to cross, received the tribal contingents on the east bank and placed each one in position for battle. Soon after the last Muslim had crossed, Abu Ubaid was ready for battle. The cavalry was kept in front and a large contingent of the Saqif, Abu Ubaid's tribe, held the center where Abu Ubaid himself stood with the army standard. The Persians made no move. Abu Ubaid at once ordered the attack, and the Muslim army, preceded by the cavalry, moved forward towards the Persian front. The Muslims were quite close to the Persians when their forward movement became disorganized. The horses saw the elephants, which, with palm trees apparently growing on their backs, made an unearthly picture. The elephants also had bells tied around their necks, or perhaps their trunks, and their riders were able to make these bells ring, which made the beasts appear even more frightening. And the Persian heavy cavalry with horse and rider clothed in shining armor did nothing to reassure the Arab horse. The Arab horse stopped, shied, turned and bolted. The Muslim riders fought to control their mounts and managed to do so before they had gone too far. But the best of the cavalrymen were unable to persuade their horses to advance upon the Persians. During this confusion, the Muslim infantry moved up and engaged in an archery duel with the Persians, in which the latter had the upper hand because of their more powerful bows and heavier arrows. It was an inauspicious beginning for the Muslims, and the situation turned more adverse as Bahman, seeing the state of the Muslim cavalry, ordered the advance, and the Persian army led by the cavalry and the elephants moved forward. The noise of the elephant bells now became louder, increasing the din of battle. This led to a desperate struggle, in which only the courage of the Muslim soldiers and the example of the Muslim officers prevented a collapse. The Persians made a masterly use of their bows and drove several wedges into the Muslim front, but the penetration was not allowed to go deep. Although crowded and unable to maneuver, the Muslims fighting in groups beat off the Persian attacks, causing heavy losses, and were able to maintain a fairly orderly formation. But it was obvious that the situation would get still more desperate with time. It was now about midday. It was at this stage of battle that one of Abu Ubaid's detractors, a man named Maslama bin Aslam, said to him, "O man, you do not have the knowledge that we have. You rejected our advice, and soon all the Muslims will be annihilated with you because of your useless plan." Abu Ubaid could think of nothing better to say than, "O man, go forth and fight." There were abler officers than Abu Ubaid in the Muslim army, but there was none braver. He could see that the horses had become ungovernable, and it was a waste of time to try to get them back into battle. Abu Ubaid was not the man to let his horse decide whether or not he should fight. He sprang off his horse and ordered the cavalry to dismount and attack on foot. The Muslim cavalry abandoned its horses and, sword in hand, joined the infantry as Abu Ubaid ordered the attack again. The Muslims, disencumbered of their horses, rushed at the Persian front line, which reeled under the Muslim blows. This now became a battle of foot against horse and foot against elephant. Abu Ubaid, followed by his clan and accompanied by his cavalry commander, Abu Mihjan, led the attack. The Muslim commander shouted to his men to attack the elephants and cut their girths, and the Muslims moved accordingly upon the huge animals. Many were killed and wounded by the javelins and arrows shot by the elephant riders, but several groups reached their quarry and cut the girths, bringing down the riders, who were then killed on the ground. The battle now reached its climax with fierce fighting everywhere. It was still anybody's game, with the odds rather in favor of the Persians, whose organization was still intact. The largest and more ferocious of the elephants was a white giant, which stood in the center and was doing the most damage. Abu Ubaid, with his standard in one hand and a javelin in the other, advanced upon this elephant, and now began a duel between man and beast. Abu Ubaid approached the elephant and hurled his javelin, which struck and blinded the animal in one eye. Then, with drawn sword, he eluded the flailing trunk and caught under the elephant and cut its girth, bringing down the Hoda and its occupants. Those of the Persians who could evade the blows of Abu Ubaid's sword dispersed quickly. Abu Ubaid next attacked the elephant from a side and with one powerful blow cut off the elephant's trunk. But this was the gallant Muslim's last blow. The enraged monster knocked Abu Ubaid down with its leg and placed a foot upon its fallen foe. Under the enormous weight of the great white beast, the body of Abu Ubaid crumpled like a plastic toy. The death of Abu Ubaid marked a turning point in the Battle of the Bridge. His cousin Abu Mihjan rushed forward and struck at the leg of the elephant, gashing it badly. He was joined by the fallen commander's brother, Al-Hakam, who picked up the standard and assumed command of the army. The two of them drove the elephant back and dragged the mangled remains of Abu Ubaid from the scene of combat. But soon after, Al-Hakam also fell, and Abu Ubaid's son Jabir followed his uncle in command and in death. Then one after the other, the officers named by Abu Ubaid before battle, all from his own clan, took the standard and one after the other fought and fell as martyrs. Along the entire front, the battle was raging with unrelenting fury. But now, as the Muslims came to know that Abu Ubaid and 6 others in the line of command had been killed in battle, they began to lose heart and to fall back. At this moment, Bahman, with superb judgment, sensed the turn of the tide and ordered his front rank to counterattack. Meanwhile, the white elephant had died of its wounds. The Saqif were the heaviest sufferers on the Muslim side. Their commander, his brother and his son, and 4 others of his clan warriors who were among their best, had commanded the army and died in the thickest of the fighting. With them had also fallen many more of the tribe. This turned the mood of some of them into a violent, suicidal one. One especially, Abdullah bin Marsad, decided that none should survive this battle. Under the pressure of the Persian heavy cavalry, which was exhilarated by the scent of victory, the Muslims began to retreat rapidly towards the bridge with the intention of crossing to safety. Seeing this move, Abdullah bin Marsad rushed to the bridge, shouting, "O people, die for what your commanders have died for, or fight till victory." As he got to the bridge, he cut the cords which held the nearest boat, and the bridge floated away. The only route of Muslim escape was severed. The Muslim retreat turned chaotic as they rushed to the side of the bridge, while the exulting Persians attacked with great vigor to finish the army of Islam. All order vanished from the Muslim ranks, and it was clear that few, if any, would escape. A large number of Muslims, not knowing what else to do, plunged into the river, even those who could not swim, and the Persians pressed closer and increased the violence of their assaults, confident that not one of their foes would escape the slaughter. But the Persians had not reckoned on Muthanna. This grand soldier once again rose to glory in the darkest hour, which the Muslims were to know in their campaign against Persia. He took command of the army under circumstances when few would dare to even attempt to take command, and organized a rear guard for the close defense of the bridge side. Along with his own veterans, he fought off the Persians as they struggled to get to the helpless, seething mass on the river bank. With Muthanna stood Salid, Abu Ubaid's deputy, and a man who had been one of Khalid's blessed lieutenants, Asim bin Amr. The Persian storm broke on the rock of Muthanna's rear guard, and the Muslims gained a much-needed respite. Muthanna ordered the repair of the bridge, and work began at once at the bridge site. He called to the men, "O people, I am with you." Just such an assurance from Muthanna could restore order, for the presence of Muthanna was a battle-winning factor. "Cross calmly and do not panic. Do not drown yourselves. I shall remain at my post until the last of you has reached the other bank." Under the shield provided by Muthanna and his veterans, the bridge was repaired and the defeated army began to cross. At the side stood Abdullah bin Marsad, the man who had cut the bridge. He was still trying to dissuade the soldiers from crossing, and he kept at it until someone caught the misguided fellow and brought him to Muthanna. Muthanna hit the man and asked, "What made you do this?" "So they should fight," replied Abdullah simply. As the crossing proceeded, Muthanna held the Persians off and slowly began to fall back onto the bridge. Then his own men started to cross, and now the Persian attacks increased in fury as their stalwarts struck to cut down the rear guard. Finally, only two men remained on the east bank, Muthanna and Salid. Salid fell dead from a Persian blow, and Muthanna, like the celebrated Marshal Ney in Napoleon's retreat from Moscow, was the last man to cross the river. Muthanna was badly wounded. The worst of his wounds was in his face and mouth, where a Persian spear had struck him. After him, the bridge was hastily dismantled by the Muslims, of whom only a third remained. As the Muslims assembled in their camp at Maroha on the west bank, Muthanna's greatest worry was that the Persians would rebuild the bridge and cross the river, but he was saved from the predicament by the uncertain politics of the Persian Empire. Bahman had determined to cross the Euphrates and put paid to the Muslim account when news reached him of an uprising against Rustam. The capital apparently was in ferment, regarding this as a more serious threat to the empire than the broken Muslim army. He at once ordered a return to Ctesiphon, and the Persian army marched away, leaving a detachment to watch the river. Of the 9,000 Muslims who had taken part in the Battle of the Bridge, 4,000 laid down their lives, of whom a little more than half were drowned. But the brave warriors accounted for 6,000 Persian lives. 2,000 Muslims, all of Abu Ubaid's army, fled, some from the east side of the river, and others after crossing the bridge, and returned to Arabia. When Muthanna counted his men, he found only 3,000 left. almost all of whom were veterans of his own older army, and many of these, including himself and his lieutenant, Asim bin Amr, were wounded. The fugitives who returned to Medina tried to hide themselves, afraid to show their faces. They had actually fought with courage, but were nevertheless ashamed of having left the battlefield as vanquished men. Following a sound strategy, Musanna abandoned Hira and marched with his weary armies to Ulais, there to rest and recoup. He also sent a messenger to the Caliph to inform him of the fate of the Muslim army in Iraq, and in due course this messenger returned with the instructions of Umar. Stay at your post. Lo, help shall soon come. This was a terrible blow. Never before had the Muslim state in its brief 13-year history suffered such a crushing defeat, and the impact on Medina was very sad indeed. Umar felt it as a personal loss because the disaster was due to Abu Ubaid's leadership, and he himself had appointed the man to command. It took all the great courage of the man to bear the burden of it with fortitude and equanimity. Those of the fugitives who feared the taunts of others and the wrath of the Caliph need not have done so, for in this tragedy Umar showed how big he was and how broad his shoulders were. O Lord, he said, every Muslim is in my charge and I am a refuge for all Muslims. May Allah bless Abu Ubaid. Having crossed the river, if only he had secured his position by the side of a hill, I wish he had not crossed and sought his death, but had returned to me. One much respected Muslim named Muad, a reciter of the Quran, was among those who had fled, and he repented it deeply. Whenever he recited the Quran and came to the verse, "And whoever turns his back to them, except when maneuvering for battle or rejoining a company, he has incurred the wrath of Allah. His habitation shall be hell, a terrible journey's end." He would weep bitterly. Umar consoled him. "Do not weep, O Muad. I am your refuge, and you have returned to me." End of chapter 3.